Hi there, welcome back to the Middle East video blog. I'm Jay.
I'm MEVB.
Today, in our first episode of the new year, we're going to be talking about drones, or unmanned aerial vehicles, UAVs. Now, everyone's heard about these. They've been a pretty controversial part of America's strategy in the Middle East and elsewhere. But let's go ahead and start off with some background. In fact, drones have been used before Obama, even during the Bush administration. They've been used as early as 2004. They were initially used for surveillance purposes so that we could gather more intelligence about what was going on in the ground where our troops weren't currently occupying, places like Iraq, Libya, and Afghanistan. But then over the course of time, they of course expanded to other regions such as Yemen, Somalia, and most pivotally, Pakistan.
It's been an integral part of the United States counter-terrorism strategy. So whereas before, I guess with the Bush administration, before drones, I would say we were in an era where adversaries would sort of fight out their issues with conventional warfare. But since drones, we see this more specific, more targeting approach that doesn't require boots on the ground per se.
But of course, when we increase our ability to strike certain targets, that also opens the chance that there is increased collateral damage. One of the main reasons that the drone program is so controversial is that civilians, sometimes American citizens, can be accidentally injured and, in instances, killed by drone strikes.
Yeah, and that's actually really ironic because a lot of the arguments defending the drones and the drone program, as opposed to conventional warfare, have been that because they're more targeted, you get less civilian casualties from it. But we don't know. The government has not been so transparent with it. There really is no accountability. We don't know what the CIA is doing, how many people they're really targeting. We have a lot of estimated numbers, but we're really not sure about any of the numbers actually, or the percentages.
Even the data from Pakistan, where the majority of drone strikes have taken place in recent years, even the data that the own government and the Ministry of Defense is putting out is in ways contradictory. And this sort of brings us to one of the misconceptions, and in fact, the politics of drones. The idea that the number of civilian deaths is very high and is unacceptable. Oftentimes we'll hear this rhetoric coming from voices inside of Pakistan, members of government. But we have to remember that there are political implications here. Obviously, if their civilians are being killed, no matter the number, they need to express outrage about that. People often criticize the American government for orchestrating some drone strikes without the permission of the countries in which these strikes are taking place. But it's important to just sort of analyze the actual technology of drones to realize that rarely, if ever, is that even the case. While drones may be a good precision tactical strike, that doesn't mean that they're stealthy. In fact, you can even hear a drone overhead before it actually launches a missile. So keep in mind that these drones are obviously being picked up by the radar systems of these countries that we're operating in. And the drones are in fact not actually used in conflict areas where we aren't on the same page as the government. Obviously, the Pakistani government doesn't want to see civilians killed by these drone strikes, but they also admit at the same time that America's cooperation and drone strikes that target Taliban and Al-Qaeda leaders in the northern region of Waziristan are a fundamental part of their country's national security.
To begin with, our actions are effective. In the intelligence gathered at bin Laden's compound, we found that he wrote, "We could lose the reserves to enemies' airstrikes. We cannot fight airstrikes with explosives." Other communications from Al-Qaeda operatives confirm this as well. Dozens of highly skilled Al-Qaeda commanders, trainers, bomb makers, and operatives have been taken off the battlefield. Plots have been disrupted that would have targeted international aviation, U.S. transit systems, European cities, and our troops in Afghanistan.
Yeah, so the drone program, we don't know how useful it has been, but essentially the government believes that it has been useful in their counterterrorism strategy.
We've actually seen recently a shift in the drone policy of America and the Obama administration. In fact, since 2010, the frequency of drone strikes has decreased in a rather substantial way. America announced that there would be a stall or a freeze in drone strikes in Pakistan's North Waziristan region in order to allow the government to successfully, hopefully, negotiate with some of the insurgents and the militants in that region. There are two really fundamental changes or shifts that we see from this new drone policy from America. Prior to this agreement, what we saw was a frequency of what are called signature strikes, where Americans and the drones would target sort of training facilities with the hopes that our targets were in fact where we were striking. But now there's a much higher reliance on what are called force protection strikes, which means that when we have intelligence that insurgents are massing and are about to attack American or NATO forces in places like Afghanistan, then we will use a drone to strike and disrupt that specific attack that we have intelligence is impending. Because this strike is much less vague, it is also used less frequently. The other fundamental change and shift in drone policy is that the CIA keeps what's called sort of the kill list of high priority targets. Previously, the list was always kept at 20 individuals, and as soon as one person was confirmed eliminated and successfully targeted by a drone strike, another individual would automatically fill up on that list so that it was constantly at 20 without a very rigorous oversight process to actually check who was being added to that list. The more long-term consideration, I think, is that the American troops are going to face a serious drawdown in Afghanistan by the end of this year, 2014. Which means that the bases of operation where the operators who are actually manning these drones and flying them into Pakistani territories, if we're simply reducing our troops, then we're reducing the number of locations where we have the ability to successfully launch and orchestrate these drone strikes. And so as we reach this turning point, I think we can now change our discussion and talk about the merits and whether or not these drone strikes have been good or bad for American foreign policy.
Is it a good thing that now we're limiting the drones, or was it a good thing that we even had this capability that we were using drones? The drone capability is a very American-specific capability at the moment, and we don't know the rules and ethics of how this works. So one of the concerns I have is that as more and more countries develop drone capabilities, how is that going to change warfare as we know it, when it shifts from conventional warfare into drones?
My main concern is that I don't know if it's good strategy. I think when you're fighting a war that, as we've stated, is not a conventional war, you're fighting terrorism or an idea, you're fighting a sentiment of hatred against America, it can't produce any good to so unilaterally strike and cause civilian collateral damage that's just going to reduce and damage America's image abroad. It may kill today's terrorists, but I can't help but think that it's just creating tomorrow's terrorists.
Benefit of the drone strikes, they have created enormous resentment among some here in the region who view the strikes as another sign of American arrogance. Everywhere I travel, from Yemen,
I think Americans, they have no right. They have no right to. This is our fight.
To Pakistan.
You can keep saying yes, you're hitting the top leadership, but the byproduct of this is anger among people, the innocent people who are getting killed.
But looking at it comparatively of what the approach used to be versus what the approach is with drones, I really do think that there is a merit to using drones. I mean, before, other countries used to be able to, I mean, especially the Middle East, used to look at the United States and see the United States as, they can just waltz into Afghanistan, they can just waltz into Iraq. I mean, especially Iraq was a unilateral decision that Americans made without no United Nations consent or anything. So that, I think, really fueled the anti-Americanism in the region. And of course, drones are not the perfect solution, but compared to that whole invasive approach, I think they're more tactful in that way.
I'm not so sure that that's a reasonable comparison. Just because you would have more collateral damage from an invasion, that doesn't inherently mean that on its own merits, drones are therefore a better policy. Because if we didn't engage in the drone technology, in fact, the barriers to invasion of a place like Pakistan will probably prevent us from engaging altogether. If an invasion isn't on the table at all because the problems posed by it are simply too daunting, then you're left with collateral damage from drones or no collateral damage. Because you engage in more cooperation from an intelligence standpoint, maybe if you saw more special ops operations, then you wouldn't see the kind of collateral damage posed by drones.
Well, obviously the best solution would be to have the full cooperation with the government of the countries where we see threats like Al-Qaeda or any terrorist threats. Then that would be the optimal solution. But then again, we have been trying to cooperate with a lot of such governments, and there's a reason why Americans have to feel the need to be involved there. I don't think it's, I wish it weren't as necessary, but looking at it, looking at the threats, it is, and we can't really deny that. So if we're really talking about the whole anti-Americanism, first of all, that's not obviously not the only reason why there is terrorism. It is a big one, granted, but there was no invasion or drone strikes before 9/11, but it happened. So I really think that it's important for a country like America that's in such a threat zone needs to take some action to protect itself. And if drones are the way where you can do that with minimal casualties, we'll leave you with the question and you can decide for yourself.
Stay tuned for more episodes from MEVB. Thanks very much for watching. I'm Jay.
I'm Marve.
Have a good night.